Here we go. Okay, so it's Chris and Rob. We're back for a third occasion. We've had a couple of other chats where we've discussed our differences over the last couple of years, and it's the 8th of March. It's 9 o'clock in the UK, approx. And Rob's over in Singapore. We've had our differences. We've had our different opinions about the recent pandemic over the last couple of years. We did a few kind of chats online, which set us apart, and we had contrasting views on a lot of things. So we've decided to do these chats to kind of try and find some areas where we may possibly agree. Certain areas we maybe have aligned, but then other areas we've kind of thrown it back into sort of contrasting opinions. So over to you, Rob. Anything to add on that?
I think that's a pretty good summary. Maybe just to say that during the end of our last interaction, if anyone's had the stamina to listen to it all the way to the end, they probably get the sense from me that I'm running out of steam on the discussion a little bit. So what I'll say is I'm sort of reluctantly back at the table here, right? So and that's purely because you asked me to, and I want to do you that courtesy. I think your feeling from you is that I took quite a bit of the lead in at least the last conversation. And you've asked if you can take the lead on this one, and I'm happy to do so, just so we can say the whole thing is fair and equitable, right? So, yeah, brilliant. That's where I am. Brilliant. Over to you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Rob. If you remember, we left the last conversation, and you'd given me a little bit of, well, I had some homework to do, which was to revisit the paper about, where there was a report written about a paper about the level of miscarriages and other vaccine-related events, adverse events, that was a post-rollout Pfizer data collation report, essentially. But you claim that the lady researcher had maybe been slightly misleading or disingenuous with her reporting on the fact that the miscarriage data was, apparently quite high post-vaccine, and worryingly so. But upon reviewing the data, you then came back and said that you disagreed. You said that there was no cause of concern. Essentially, it seemed to be it was basically disingenuous reporting, and also that the data had been maybe misrepresented in the fact that the ladies or the mothers that had not shown any data were not necessarily women who'd experienced miscarriage. So it was kind of like automatically assumed that the people who hadn't been captured in the data had maybe I'm not explaining it very well, but we understand where we're at. There's the data had been represented incorrectly by the reporter that I then trusted. So you said, Chris, revisit the actual data, and then come back to me and see if you still agree with what the lady says, essentially. Is that right? Would you agree with that?
Maybe I wanted to let you finish, so probably just a couple of points of
okay, clarification. Well, I don't really want to labour this. What I'll do is I'll come to the point of it. We both understand where we kind of stood on that. You granted me the good favour to allow me to revisit it. I said to you at one point, I said that I'd read the bits pertinent to the miscarriage data, and I was thinking to myself, maybe there was more to this report than I had actually read it pretty thoroughly prior to bringing it to the table. I understand how the data was collated. I would still say that ultimately, Rob, and I know this, you mentioned that the women who'd not been included in the report, it would be difficult to assume that any adverse reaction had occurred to them. Therefore, you could safely assume that they shouldn't be involved in the data anyway. I would still maintain that the ladies who were not chased down or actively pursued for, you know, an outcome, it was still inconclusive. You would probably have, it was still inconclusive. And I would say that basing science on that and assuming that all of those women had safe full-term pregnancies is probably not the best circumstances to be rolling out treatments based on inconclusive evidence and assumption. I understand entirely that, you know, it is probably likely that those ladies did not suffer an adverse reaction. However, or an adverse event, sorry. However, upon reading it again, and I read it through a couple of times, there were other glaring things that stood out to me that I could have mentioned, which I didn't, which would add to the doubt in my mind. So pertaining to that fact alone, you would have to admit that it is inconclusive, and that is bad science, especially to be rolling out something so serious globally without really knowing greater numbers and greater fields of data and for longer term. This would possibly align with you. I'm not sure how you'd feel about that. Would you respond to that, or do you think
So
that's
the specific question is, what? Sorry, Chris.
So the specific, I know I rambled there, and it's difficult to.
No, it's all right. It's all right. I just want to make sure I'm answering in accordance with your specific question.
There was a field of pregnant women.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was some that experienced an adverse reaction, of which some were miscarriages. But there was a field of that set of ladies that were never pursued for an answer, and it was about 270. Was it about 270?
I think sorry,
it was 230 out of the
no outcome was
270.
about 230.
There was no outcome recorded on the medical trial data. So it was assumed that those ladies had not suffered any adverse reaction. And even the very first, pretty much the first sentence of the data report actually says the magnitude, therefore the magnitude of any adverse reactions appearing outside of those ladies would never be known. It would be inconclusive. It further raises doubt about surely those ladies should have been proactively contacted. Surely.
All right. I think I understand the nature of your question now, so let me try and answer it, because hopefully we can move on. I think my summary, Chris, is that there are specific points that were made during our last discussion which you still haven't taken on board, and that's based on a couple of notes I've just been jotting down as you've been talking.
Okay.
One is that you're still referring to these events as reactions, which is something I admitted to being guilty of during discussion number 1, which I corrected for. So I thought we were kind of on the same page. Everything that's going into
the tongue a couple of times there. Agreed. Yeah, adverse events. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are adverse events, and the more specifically, what you just said at the start was adverse reactions that are vaccine related, and that second part is too much of you can't tie that together because that hasn't been established yet, right? So just clarify that. The second part that I'm not sure you've taken on board is the nature of this data collection. So you've just referred to it as medical trial data, and what I tried to clarify during our last discussion is it's not a trial. The trials by this point were over. The exam question for this paper was, have we any evidence of adverse events that can be a cause for concern post rollout, right? So when we frame the question that way, the subsequent question which you ask is, surely shouldn't there have been a follow-up on these pregnant women? Is no, there should not, because that's not the exam question. The trial is over. That trial was concluded pre-rollout. So what we're doing now is looking at adverse events reporting databases to try and understand whether anything has been reported that sort of points towards a trend that is concerning in nature, and the answer is no, it doesn't. The adverse events reporting system, as you know, is a passive one. So there is no mechanism by which someone who has a adverse event reported in that system is followed up on. And logistically, it's probably impossible just given the sheer volumes of entries that go in, right? That would overwhelm even the best healthcare systems in the world, would be my guess. So that's just not how it works. So the short answer to the question is no. It's not inconclusive in the sense that there was no outcome for a bunch of people who had a initial adverse event, which could be anything from a, as we spoke last time, it could be from a dizzy spell to, whatever else it is,
headache,
a red
fever, it could be
whatever.
anything on a spectrum of things.
So the no outcome means they didn't come back and say, look, I'm still suffering adverse events, which were subsequently recorded. So I suppose that the key counter question that I would have, and I know you want to take the lead here, but I'm just trying to move past this point. So the key question I would have in order to try and draw a line would be, are we now today in a different position that we were in, you and I mean, are we in a different position than we were in at the end of the last conversation, which is in respect to the fate of the 200 plus women who were referenced in the Pfizer report? Or are we still aligned on this very simple fact, which is we don't know whether or not they carried their babies to full term, but have no reason to believe that they miscarried? So are we still aligned on that statement? Because if we are, there's not really much more to discuss on that.
I think I'll repeat, which is the fact that I think on something of this magnitude, that those people involved in this kind of nature of a post-rollout collation of data, it should have been something that should be more conclusive. I think that's fair to say. I think that's fair to say, rather than just assume they've wandered off into the distance, had a child safely, and there's no comeback whatsoever. I think, for the sake of something of this nature, I think 270 women to have actively pursued them for more data, for more feedback, would have been the diligent thing to have done, rather than just assume everything. I mean, we ascertained there were holes in the reporting system. You said it's a passive system, but you again, there's grey areas there, Rob, where there could have been adverse events post, during pregnancy, even now. With are there any defects in the children that would be accreditable to a certain medical intervention during the pregnancy? Nobody knows. We don't know. It's inconclusive. I think we could labour this point. I think I've got my doubts about it, and you're more I suppose trusting that the system is.
I think that's the wrong word in this circumstance.
Okay.
So yeah.
Well, all right. Well,
so I suppose I'll object to you saying that I'm trusting the system. I mean, the data is the data. It's unobjective. It's it is what it is. It has no emotions tied to it. It has no degree of subjectivity. Data is just data, Chris. Right? I mean, and all I'm doing is looking at that data, and all I'm saying is, based on what we see in the report, the objective statement, which is absolutely undeniable, it cannot be denied with a straight face by anyone. And I know you don't want to deny it, but the fact that you're torturing yourself over actually admitting it is sort of telling, right? The absolute stone cold fact is we have no reason to believe that any of the women that were referenced had any subsequent adverse event, certainly not a miscarriage. We have no reason to believe that. Now,
well, you don't
even
know.
If I was to accept it,
you don't know.
But that's, don't know. Okay, you're right. But yeah. You've indicated that. No, but you have indicated. Let's wind back to the beginning, Christoph, because you have indicated that there is a straight line between increased risk of miscarriage and vaccine. Now, even if, let me meet you in the middle here, right? Let me meet you bang in the middle of this and say, yeah, you're right. It's inconclusive.
Yeah.
Right. So neither of us know. So do you retract your initial premise that there is a straight line to be drawn between the increased risk of miscarriage and vaccines?
I don't.
I think you have to. I think you have to. You've painted yourself into a corner because you said we don't know. So you can't stand by what you initially said, which is a straight line between those two things. That's an absolute contradiction.
We don't know. We don't know.
I know. I agree.
I'd like
But
to know before the President of the United States of America tells women to get
Chris,
vaccinated.
you said you did know. Chris, you said you did know. The first post you posted on Facebook about this is you said there was a direct line between vaccines and the increased risk of miscarriage. And now you're saying you don't know, right? So do you retract that initial statement? How can you not?
I can't remember the exact wording that I put, but I posted a report, Rob. I posted
Look,
that
I
report.
think,
You pulled it
yeah,
apart.
I think everyone. Let's move on from this, Chris, because my statement here is that I believe this is kind of why I'm a little bit reluctant to come back to the table, because I think, based on the last discussion and the short interaction we've just had on this point again, everything has been said that needs to be said. I think people who are logically minded will look at this and they'll judge it for its merit. People who are on your side of the fence cannot be swayed on this, and I'm absolutely comfortable with that. So they'll listen to this discussion and they'll make up a bunch of reasons why I'm wrong, and that's fine. But the people who are either on the fence or are not sure where to go with this, I'm sure we'll listen to the discussion we've just had and they'll make a good judgment. So I'm totally comfortable to leave it there.
I'd like to add that maybe I'm looking at it with doubt. I'm trying to with
You definitely are.
I'm looking at it with doubt, but you're looking at it with a kind of just a very objective view of the data. And I'm seeing holes
Which
all
is
over.
exactly what we should be doing, right? We
Not
should be looking at things
necessarily,
with an
not
object.
when it's provided
You don't
in-house
think
by the people who are trying to
you
sell
don't
you the
think
book.
objective. You don't think the way to look at data is objective. You think the way to look at data is subjective. Is that what you're saying?
I think the way that the data has been collated is subjective. I don't think that it's been collated in a way where it's conclusive, which tells me that there is some reason why it's not. Why haven't they followed them up? That Rob, it was created
Because that's
in-house
not the way
by
the system
Pfizer.
works.
It was created in-house by Pfizer. You said that the data was collated itself by a passive system, which is
Yeah.
which itself you didn't know about when you actually had your job.
I didn't need to know about it. I didn't need to know about it. It's for medical professionals to use. It's not for the
It's
common
not.
person who receives a jab.
There's grey area there. A medical professional can do it on behalf of a patient, or a patient can do it themselves. But that grey area creates confusion as well. My doctor's probably done it, or the patient's
Let
probably
me
done
let me
it.
concede it all. Let me concede it all. Right. Here's the thing between you and I. Right. I'm happy to concede a lot of these points. I'm happy to say that there's probably a vast amount of underreporting as it relates to adverse events. I'm totally comfortable to say
Right.
all of that. Right. But you are massively uncomfortable to even give the slightest bit of quarter when you make a massive error. You are so uncomfortable with it, and
I'm
it's
uncomfortable.
very telling.
Okay. I'm uncomfortable when I've seen data that's created in-house
No,
and
no.
which
What I'm saying is you're uncomfortable to concede when you've made an error. You are uncomfortable to concede it.
I'm uncomfortable making a deal with you, Rob, which you tried to do last time as well, which is where you said, right, if I concede this, you concede this. I'm uncomfortable making a deal where it's almost like you're willing to concede it if I'll concede. And I think, no, let's scrap that. I'm either correct or I'm incorrect. All I've done is raise the point. I've raised a report that I've seen.
Yeah.
The more you've asked me to look at it, the more I can see doubt raised in it.
Fine.
And the
Fine.
more you
I'm okay. I'm okay.
the more you
I'm
look at
totally
it, the more
fine.
you just say follow the data, follow the data. But the more you dig, you can see that the data might be incorrect, or it could be
Yeah.
subject to
It
false.
sounds. We both said we want to move on past this topic, right? And I'm really comfortable to do so because in my mind, it's very glaring, and for me, it's unquestionable right now to a logical person who listens to this back.
That's
This
the problem.
side of the fence they're going to follow, and I'm fine to move on. You might disagree, in which case you should be comfortable to move on because you've proved your point as well, right? But I'm very comfortable that I've said what needs to be said and shown what needs to be shown.
You just said the word it's unquestionable, which is telling to me everything should be.
That's fine. That's fine, Chris. Look,
okay,
yeah,
we agree to disagree.
I'm very comfortable that I've said what needs to be said on this matter. So yeah, let's move on past it.
Okay. Well, that's fair enough. Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to revisit it, and let's move on. Shall we move on? Yeah. Right. Okay. So I did have another thing that I'd like to potentially go through with you, just to it's not to trip you up or to ask you anything that's going to like sort of make you.
I'm an open book, Chris. You can ask me anything you want. Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. So, okay, I've got serious doubts over these the vaccines. Yeah, obviously, I've got serious doubts. Um, I was really reluctant to participate in it. Whenever I raised some doubts or questions on social media, there's certain people who would be supportive of what I was saying and openly having conversations, and then you were very, very vocally against a lot of the things that I posted. And fair play to you, you did come at me with a lot of like sort of information, and sometimes you did open my eyes to certain things.
Not
Ultimately,
sure that part's true, but yeah, okay.
well, there were a couple of things along the way, but all right. There was there's something that I'd like to just try with you. Would it be okay? I'm not. But it last week you were doubting my epistemology, in which it allowed you to then maybe pull apart some of my reckoning and methodology, and therefore because you've maybe found a link between my thinking and the data incorrect, I think then it gave you maybe justification to say, well, Chris, if this is how you've acted now, how have you acted with everything else that you've kind of proposed or you know, or you regard as fact, and my epistemology may be based on incorrect methodology and foundations that are not based in fact, essentially. So I would like to maybe address that a little bit, because I can see at some point you potentially think I've veered off and I've gone over and I've built everything else on a lie, and then I've followed down into a line of further mistruth and etc. But I'd like to just, can we rewind back to the start of the pandemic? And I want to take you through my little journey. So this might be eye opening for you, but it also would allow me to explain why maybe we've diverged so greatly. So I'll go through a couple of little questions, and if possible, you just give a yes or no answer. And then at some point we've diverged, haven't we, with our thinking or our belief systems? Would you? So
I don't. I'm a bit unsure where we're going with this, but
all
okay.
right, if I ask you a
Just for the
series of
purposes of,
questions, if I ask you a series of questions and you say whether you agree or disagree, that would be a really good start. So
am I okay? Am I allowed to say I don't know?
of course, say what you want. It seems to have frozen up, Rob. Just one moment. I think something's frozen up. Rob, can you still hear me?
I can. Yeah, your image is frozen, but I can still hear you.
Okay, I'm happy to continue if you want to keep just with the. I've not adjusted anything. I think it's just frozen up. So firstly, so in December 2019, the World Health Organization redefined, as far as I'm concerned, or recalibrated the meaning of the word pandemic, and thus enabling them to declare one. Are you aware of that, or do you agree with it, or disagree with it, or do you not know?
Yeah, I want to be careful because you made the question was very, very specific, which is around them redefining the meaning in the word, and that bit probably prompts a different conversation. So my answer is, I'm not aware of that.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, they did recalibrate the word.
I know that's what you've said. Yeah, I know that's what you've said, but okay, I'm not. I'm neither agreeing or disagreeing because I need the full rationale behind that. And I don't think that's where you want to take it.
Okay, well, essentially, there's certain parameters, and it has to have like obtained a certain R number, etc. It has to have affected a certain percentage of populations, etc. But the threshold on that was changed, as far as I'm aware. So immediately there was this doubt in my mind, thinking, why have they done that? Is that for our safety, or what's the purpose of that? So the second point would be in early 2020, state of emergency was declared in the UK, and it changed British politics into like a warlike attitude, where it was kind of, anything went basically. There was quickly installed coronavirus legislation, etc., which again, that was installed very quickly with very little due process. Are you aware of that, and do you agree that that happened?
I can only answer the same way, which is you've made a statement which is based on you said things like without due process. Now, until we unpack all of that, which is a separate thread in the conversation on its own, I can neither agree nor disagree. So my answer is the same.
Okay, well,
It's not possible, Chris, for me to say yes or no because you've made it's a very loaded question, right?
It
Are
is,
you
yeah,
aware
yeah,
that the government? Are you aware that the government did a lot of stuff without due process? I can neither agree nor disagree with that because I need to understand exactly what you're talking about. It's a loaded
okay.
question.
Understood. Right. Okay. Understood. As far as I'm concerned,
I know, as far as you're concerned, that is the truth. But yeah, carry on.
yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay. So, also Dr. Neil Ferguson's Imperial College projection, thankfully, never came anywhere close to being anywhere near correct. Am I correct in stating that?
Don't know.
Right. Okay. So he predicted that something like 500,000 British people would die within about 6 months, and it just didn't happen. But we stayed on the same trajectory. So this is where I'm going now. Also, statistically, at the same time, flu disappeared, and in effect, all seasonal respiratory cases were suddenly rebranded as COVID. And as far as I'm aware, that happened. There's been no explanation as to where flu went that year. I mean, would you agree with that?
No.
No. Okay. No. Would you agree that PCR tests were used to build up a devastatingly inaccurate picture of transmission? Perfectly healthy people were testing positive. I did look into PCR tests a lot, Rob, about how they work, about how they the threshold cycles can be raised.
I neither agree nor disagree because I haven't seen any evidence to that effect.
Haven't you? Right. So
No.
basically, as far as I'm concerned, the pandemic was built on testing.
I know. As far as you're concerned, I know. But you asked me
I
haven't seen any evidence to that effect. So I don't know.
So the whole premise of the virus pandemic, especially in the UK, was built up around this PCR testing. So,
Let me just. Sorry, continue first. Finish. Yeah,
I was
sorry.
going to say a lot of it appeared to be well, it was suggested there was a lot of false positives that were given. So perfectly healthy people were then restricted in their behaviour or deemed to be a case or etc. So as far as I'm concerned, I did look into that quite deeply, and again, I found it to have to hold water. It appeared to be inflated figures
So
based
yeah.
on
So I'm
PCR.
letting you finish that thought.
Yeah, go on.
Just in. But I just want to now raise something that we agreed at the start of the call off with the recording, which is that if you introduce a data point, I allow you to raise it. I won't stop you from raising it, but I will say, and you've agreed that you will agree with this, that new data point that you're introducing is 100% unverified. So I just want you to, for the record, just say yes, you agree with that.
Fine, yeah, I totally agree with that, and we did discuss that prior to it. And any new information, as far as I'm concerned, it's not really new information because this is stuff that I was trying to discuss openly on social media during the time we were all locked down. A lot of the time, it was sort of closed down, Rob, and this is why I think there's a misunderstanding. I'm going to move on to another point, and I realise it might be new data to you, but I think for a lot of the people on, for want of a better word, my side, understand these points to be quite realistic. Like that. So then my next point would be the excess death rates from 2020 were very similar to all those death rates in the previous 20 or 30 years. There wasn't much change, thus suggesting that there wasn't much excess death, and therefore lockdowns were questionable, etc. Okay, so apart from a spike, which would seem to be coincidental with the elderly being put into nursing homes on end of life pathways or do not recover, do not resuscitate notices, etc. So there was a huge spike in death around April, May 2020. So again, it was maybe a policy that caused that death rather than a rampant virus. Would you agree with that? You still there, Rob? Oh, he's gone. Mhm. Yeah, Rob, I've been kicked out here too for some reason, so leave it with me a second. Ah, shit. Just want you to understand where you'd see. That's fair enough. Point. You mean to say no? I don't. Right, right. This is it. Oh dear. So, so, yeah. Oh shit. Come on, please. Oh, come on, please. We're gonna lose this chat. Aren't we? No worries, there's only a couple more. This is doing my head in. Right, okay, so pull it off. Yeah, man.
stuff. Problem.